Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast number 40. We've made it to the big 4-0. I'm Lee Bodette, your host. I've been a radio broadcaster for over 40 years. I host the series called Test Drive on YouTube channel. I'm also the front man and host of Sport Car USA and, of course, a car enthusiast my entire life. My co-host is Scott Nickerson of Sport Car USA. Hello, Scott.
How's it going, Lee?
It's going very, very well. We're pleased to have as a guest today Mason Maltais, and Mason is a car enthusiast. We love talking to car enthusiasts on the show, obviously, but you are a car nut, as we are as well. Mason, welcome to our podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Give us a background as to who Mason Maltais is.
So I'm originally from out of state. I grew up in Massachusetts, and most of yeah, I know. Don't hold it against me. But most of my wife's family and my own have been in and around some type of muscle car or car restoration project throughout a good portion of my life. My father-in-law actually used to work for a guy who had a Hemi garage, and he restored something like 30 plus classic Mopar vehicles and
so
whatnot.
that's where the Mopar bug.
That's where the Mopar. I mean, that's where the Mopar bug comes from, and but which is really funny because my father-in-law is actually a diehard Ford guy and holds it against my wife all the time that she currently owns a Mopar. So that's why when I got my hands on his old car, it's a Mercury Cougar. So,
and your wife is just as much of a car enthusiast as you
she's
are.
worse than I am.
Yeah, Desiree.
Or better, depends on how you look at it.
Okay, yeah, but she's definitely better than I am in many, many ways. But when it comes to if we're treating this as a sickness, she's definitely more infected than I am.
Mason, you work for a car group called Handy Cars, also a member of Sport Car USA, and we're really happy to have you. How many vehicles do you think you've owned in your entire lifetime? Do you have a number?
Well, it's north of 30 at this point. Easily.
I was going to say like 300.
What? No, it's not. It's not quite that bad.
No?
I'm thinking like it's north of 30 in the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense.
So probably so I would say we're probably over 40 just for myself, not counting my wife.
Wow. He might have you beat, Lee.
Yeah, he might. Yeah, because as you know, listening to these podcasts, I've owned so many cars, it's ridiculous. Can't count them and I can't name them. That's for sure. Mason, if you had to have a top 5 of cars that you have owned, what would they be?
So for ones that I've owned,
you can include your wife's as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, some of the ones that I would classify as hers are definitely some of the fun ones. So I would say probably my number one favorite fun car to drive that I've ever owned would be my 2020 Shelby GT500. That thing was a missile with wheels. It was unbelievable.
That's one that's here at Sport Car USA for sale.
Yeah, it is. Well, actually, it's being sold today.
It is?
Oh. It's going away today.
Oh, my goodness.
It's a little bit traumatizing. I'm kind of glad I'm not there for it.
Yeah.
So it's
it's probably good, though. Like bittersweet. Like you're glad it's not.
It is bitter. I'm glad it's not sitting in a garage anymore.
Yeah.
And it's sitting there right in front of me that I have to walk by it. Because that was tough. But no, that car is by far one of the most fun vehicles I've ever driven. And then I would say I really, really enjoyed my wife's first Hellcat that she had. She had a 2016 in bright orange. It was Go Mango. Excuse me. Go Mango was the color.
Right.
I enjoyed that one. It was nice and loud and had all kinds of.
Lee and I got to drive that actually after she traded it in.
Yes.
Yep. And she traded that in for another Hellcat. So she went from Hellcat to Hellcat to Hellcat Red Eye. So that one was definitely a lot of fun. I really liked my Audi S5. Was a fun car to drive. It's tough to kind of keep a finger on all of them, and I'm probably leaving some out, and there are some that I like for other reasons and whatnot. But for sports cars, those are definitely my top 3 that we've had.
I know you mentioned the GT500 as your favorite of all time. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a question. The police department is not watching right now, but how fast did you have that car up to at one point?
Right, on the drag strip.
On the drag strip or on the interstate?
Definitely not on a road.
Okay.
Right.
That's a good
Close
answer.
Course.
181 miles an hour.
Oh, my goodness.
And they probably can go fast.
That's a stock.
They can. So they're to the best of my knowledge, they're aerodynamically limited to 213.
Oh, that's it.
Normally. Like without touching them. I believe that Ford actually puts in, I don't know if it's part of the track pack or what, but I know that in some of the GT500s for the Shelbys, they actually electronically limit them to 186. And part of that experiment was actually to see if mine was one of the ones that was affected by that. Didn't quite get the opportunity to get all the way there because there was a turn coming up, so I decided that 180 around a corner was not a great idea. So, but I mean, on the list of dumb things that you could do, that's probably pretty high up there. So
yeah, I wouldn't do it.
No. So I don't know if that one was actually one that was limited to 186 or not.
Yeah.
But they do that because when you get the carbon fiber track pack with the Shelby GT500, they actually give you an F1 style wing for the rear. And it gives you so much downforce once you get over that 186 number. That's actually something like 450 or 500 pounds of downforce on the rear wheels.
Wow.
Like if it gets much higher than that with all the other arrows, it'll actually crack the suspension in the rear.
Because it's pulling the car down too hard.
It's pushing the car down so hard that so they said, no, we're not going to do that. So...
over-engineered.
Yeah, so they made it so that it wouldn't go any faster than that. But if you don't have the F1 wing and you just have the normal slipstream style,
it might go faster.
It definitely should be able to go faster. It just won't corner as hard. So
you see, ladies and gentlemen, this is a real car guy, Mason Maltais, and he knows his stuff inside and out. When did the car bug hit you? Was it as a child or as a teenager?
So it was as a teenager, and I was watching an early 2000s movie, Triple X, and it stars Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel, yeah.
And there is a car in that movie. Like there's a scene where he has to get like where he has a guy get him like 10 exotic cars and stuff like that, and most of them are your typical pasta rockets, where they're Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff like that, which are all gorgeous cars. But that wasn't really the one that gave me the bug. It was the 1967 Pontiac GTO in plum color, in plum purple. I believe it was plum crazy.
Plum crazy is
it was the Mopar color, but
Mopar, yeah.
But yeah, that Pontiac GTO, for whatever reason, it gave me that itch from that point on, and someday I will own one. It is my dream car, has been ever since.
Yeah, that was one of our questions, was if you have a dream car. So is there another outside of that? I know you're working on a project right now.
Well, yeah. So I'm working on a 1973 Mercury Cougar currently. It was my father-in-law's car. He had it from the time that he was very young, and it is essentially it came to me as a Frankenstein car, where it was the body of one vehicle, the drivetrain of another, the doors off a third, because he when he bought the car originally, he bought it from some folks who were having some trouble getting it running, and he knew a trick to bypass the issue they were having, bought the car for pennies, essentially. I think the way he put it, he said, well, I've got this much money in my wallet, and they said, sold. So they didn't want the hassle of dealing with it. I think he paid like $200 or $300 for it. So it was
that's a good deal.
He got it running that day, blew that motor, bought another whole car, drove that car, realized that the frame was bent in that one, swapped the motor into a different one, and so on. It just it became this whole thing that persisted for a long time. And his dream was to fix the car up and give it to my wife as her first car.
Oh, nice.
Because it would just be like a nice heirloom type thing. Unfortunately, there was some body work that was done to it along the way that did not go to plan and caused all the windows to leak. And not great. Water in a car sitting stationary outside, not great. No. So, along the way, we had the opportunity to take the car off his hands and begin restoration on it. And where we started with it was, okay, it looks like it's got some body work that needs to be done, and whatnot. We can just replace some of these panels and so on, and then we'll revamp the drivetrain, upgrade the suspension, and so on. Just kind of and do a little bit of stuff with the car to make it fun, cool, and then we'll either give it back to him or let him drive it whenever he wants to come up and visit, and so on. it has turned into another animal entirely, which anybody who's ever restored a car is probably nodding their head right now going, could have told you that.
Yeah.
So I think the only things on it that are original to the vehicle that we got are the trunk lid, the top half of the rear fenders, the left front inner fender wall, and the engine block itself. Everything else has had to be either custom welded, fitted, or replaced. And so the body is the metalwork is all done. It is in primer. The motor is built, and at this point, I am working on trying to figure out what transmission and drivetrain and rear end and et cetera needs to go in it, because the motor is no longer the 189 horsepower stock 351 Windsor that would have been in it. It now makes over 500 horsepower with over 500 torque.
Now, in today's world, it's pretty easy, I would think. At least I've been hearing stories about getting those parts that are much needed to finish the restoration. Have you had any obstacles?
It's really, I guess the obstacles that we've run into would more than not are just around not just the quality of the parts that we want to try and get our hands on to make sure that, I'm a big fan of, do it right, do it once.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that we get the right stuff that fits properly, but we're doing a resto mod. So it's something where we want to keep the aesthetic of the car the same, and it may, if not tweaked and upgraded a little bit, but also with some of the modern conveniences, like power steering,
right,
power brakes, disc brakes.
Right, with the amount of power you're going to have, you got to be able to stop.
Steer and stop. Yeah, it's kind of important.
Those drum brakes aren't real good.
The car did come with air conditioning from the factory, which was a major ad at the time. But I know. But the compressor was a foot in diameter. Now you can get them, and it's about the size of an oil filter. So. There's all kinds of different things that need to be done to it. And of course, it was a car of the 70s, so they took a 351 cubic inch V8, and they were making. I don't know if you heard me a minute ago. 189 horsepower was the high output variety.
So you can put a pretty large engine in there.
No, I'm using the exact same block.
Oh, okay.
We took the 351, we bored it out to 408 cubic inches, put a stroker kit in it, new heads, new cams, new crank, new pistons, new rods. All the way through, and we're switching it to fuel injection away from carburation, using a Holley EFI Sniper, and so the fuel injection is going to up the fuel PSI, which will add about 10 to 15% to the power in addition to what the motor makes on its own.
That's
so
fun, then.
Without running a 2-barrel carburetor, it was making, I think it was 489 horse and 501 pound-feet of torque. So then you amp that up with the fuel injection, and we're going to be well over 5 and 5.
Wow.
So
this sounds like an atypical story of a restoration project that we hear all the time and we read about all the time, where most people are working full time and they get to it when they can get to it.
Yeah,
that's going to be a bigger obstacle is time almost.
Yeah, the time is a big deal, and also then when you get to a point and you're like, okay, I need this particular bolt, this particular
everything else
component.
Is just waiting on
everything beyond that has to wait, and so it's something that we've done in chunks up to this point. So like I said, I've got it at the point where the bodywork is done, the motor is done, and now it's just going to be a matter of, okay, I got to get my hands on a transmission, because obviously the transmission that's in it is not going to hold a 500 horsepower engine when it was built for 180.
Are you going to go manual or automatic?
No, so for 2 reasons, I believe I'm going to have to go manual. That's one of the other reasons that I haven't bought a transmission for it yet, is because I would love to put a manual in it, but the car originally was an automatic. And Cougars typically in the 70s were mostly, if not all, automatic. And it was something that was... because they were trying to go to they were a Mustang and a dinner jacket is how my father-in-law would describe them. And so they were kind of like the Ford's answer to the higher end GM products, and like the Buicks and the Chevrolet, the Buicks and the Cadillacs and whatnot. Like that was the Mercury and Lincoln lines were meant to compete with them. But it was an issue of the automatic transmission made it so that it was more of a family type vehicle, and then additionally, my wife can't drive a stick.
Oh, I didn't know
You
that.
should see her driving automatic.
She can drive an
go.
Oh yeah, no, she's not scared. She will make anybody look silly when she's behind the wheel of whatever sports car she happens to get in. But the manual transmission has remained an enigma to her, and despite several attempts to learn, she just the coordination, especially going through turns and gear changing and whatnot, as you have to match RPMs, it just becomes a confusion. So. That's the other thing. It comes from her side of the family. So to switch it to a manual transmission and then being like, all right, good luck. Let's learn.
Well, and you would have to
this
change
car.
the interior of it a bit too,
You
right?
would,
you'd have to modify it.
You'd have to modify the floor panel, but you could get your hands on some type of a boot that would allow for that modification. That's simple enough. That's not like a life-changing obstacle, especially because right now it's sitting in bare metal, well, primed metal, but like,
now would be the time.
Now would be that's why I haven't done one way or the other. And then additionally, Tremec in particular, the really good transmission brand, they're the ones who make a whole bunch of variations of manual transmissions that are plug and play to a lot of these classic cars. So I could get a modern style dual clutch 6-speed manual transmission that could handle the 500 plus horsepower, give me 6 gears so I can drive it on the highway. I can drive it through town. You can drive it in any of these different situations, and it will bolt right on. Whereas automatic transmissions, finding one that will bolt on to the backside and flywheel of backside and torque converter of a 1970s motor
that can handle all the power.
All the power. You're looking at a lot of times. You're looking at 3-speed, maybe a 4-speed automatic transmission. Which means you're looking at miles per gallon, not miles per gallon, because you lose any prayer of getting any type of like number out of the single digits for fuel economy. So you can't take the vehicle for any type of a real cruise. And then beyond that, you like the 3-speed ones obviously don't have overdrive, so highway is out. Otherwise, you're running the engine at high RPMs the entire time, or you're looking at not being able to get through town without accidentally ripping the tires off the road on occasion because it's got crazy power and it just wants to put it on the ground. So you take it from being something that you can drive to something that essentially has to go to a track. But it's not powerful enough to really warrant that. So it's kind of a weird catch-22 when you look at a lot of this stuff. So it really, because then if you're just talking transmission, that's one thing, but then you also have to look at how that matches up with the gear ratio in the rear end when you're building that, and what transmission you put in dictates what you have for a drive shaft, because all of these are rear wheel drive. So it's a whole thing.
So just like Buick and Chevy, Dodge and Chrysler, Ford and Mercury, they're all kind of in the same company, right?
Well, yeah. So I mean,
one's a more luxury edition than like the lower tier. Like Ford, Mercury was always their higher tier.
Mercury,
tuxedo.
Mercury was their mid range. So what a lot of what the big three, the Detroit auto manufacturers, did is rather than having full product lines through their brand for people to graduate through, what they did was they used the brand names as their differentiator. So like what
tiers.
Yeah, so when you got when you were starting out, you would have a Ford. And then when you got the career job and you were having the household and stuff like that, you would graduate to a Mercury, or you would graduate from a Chevy to a Buick, or from a Pontiac into a Chevy into a Buick, and so on. Yeah. And then once you had really made it, if you were really successful, that's when you would get the Cadillac, or you get the Lincoln, or you get the and so on. And so like they use the brands as the statuses, and then the trim levels of the cars within the brands to show like who really belonged, as it were. So it was a very much a status symbol type thing to have a particular brand. As we've moved into the modern era for scale of economy in terms of the manufacturing process, they've gone to making a lot of the same cars essentially between the different brands. And so when you look at a Buick with a comparable model Chevrolet, at the Chevrolet at the high tier versus like a second from the top on the Buick, like they're essentially the same car. So a lot of these manufacturers, like you look at GM, they did away with their Pontiac line. You look at Ford, they did away with the Mercury line, and so it's because they found that they were just competing with themselves for their own
Right.
sales.
Right.
And so now they have, like, everybody typically has their core line, and then they have their luxury line.
Right.
And
There's just two.
Yeah, there's just
tiers,
two.
yeah.
With the one exception, of course, being GM, because they still have Chevrolet, Buick, Cadillac, and GMC. Where GMC has kind of become that mid-luxury tier for them that they've stuck with. Chevrolet, kind of the entry level one, but then Buick is not, like, on the U.S. side. It's kind of the odd duck. You're like, I don't know necessarily how this fits, but it's because it is such a massive success overseas for whatever reason, especially in the Chinese market. Like the Buick line is just massive.
And really,
So
the
they're like, we
older
have to keep it.
generation, the older folks out there tend to go towards the Buicks.
And so that's why if you look at their advertising line, it's like, oh wait, that's a Buick.
Right.
That's kind of their tagline. It's
Exactly. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods used to represent Buick.
No, exactly.
Know exactly what they were doing. Your 73 Mercury Cougar.
Yep.
What was the sister car in Ford? Was it
Mustang?
It wasn't the Torino.
No.
Not the Ford Torino.
No.
Okay, it was the Mustang.
It was the Mustang. It is so when I was getting parts for this thing, I needed a cowl because the cowl was rotten. It was full of pinholes. And so I needed a firewall because the firewall had a mouse nest in the airbox. And so we cut the old one out. I'm like, okay, well, looking at custom welding and all of this other stuff. And then we went, well, hold on a second. Sized up a comparable year Mustang, fit like a glove.
Huh.
The only things that are
pretty much identical.
They were identical. They were the same car. The floor in that car is from a Mustang.
Oh,
that
works out well.
Yeah,
So it's probably easier to find Mustang parts.
Mustang
Cougar
parts are easy. So like the differences when you look at the Cougar versus the Mustang are primarily in your outside body panels. And I found a place on the West Coast that actually dealt in a lot of the body panels and whatnot, thankfully. But the particular one that is very, very, very different is actually in the trunk and the rear quarter panels, because on the Cougar they actually come to a fit point behind the wheel. And it is actually included in the floor of the trunk, and so when that was bad, we had to take. So the shop that I had it at took a Mustang wheel well, welded it in, cut, shaved, welded, ground it down, and then fabricated the bottom point of that rear fender to make it fit correctly so that the body lines were right for the Cougar.
Do you remember what year the Cougar was when they had the sequential taillights in the back?
So mine actually still has that.
Yours has that.
Yeah, that was one of the big upgrades when you went from a Mustang to a Cougar. That was one of the calling cards. It was kind of one of their things that they were famous for.
That's cool.
And my father-in-law in particular was very, very excited about the fact that he still has the little module for this car that you put in to make the lights blink sequentially.
Because we had a
Are you
neighbor.
swapping them out with like LED lights and stuff, and you just have to keep that module, or how does that work?
Leo, look away. I'm going to find a modern way to do it, and if we end up having to lose that, it is what it is. But
We had a neighbor. Believe it or not, it was a brother and sister, and they bought identical Cougars. And I'm thinking they were maybe 69 or 70s, but they had that sequential.
Yeah.
And we thought that was the coolest thing. They were both yellow with black tops.
I don't recall what year it was that they went to it, but I know like the Cougar, the Eliminator, which was the 1970 Cougar, which was the last one that was actually a true pony car. And then in the 70s, of course, with all the smog editions and stuff like that, that's when they went to the more cruiser mobile. But I don't recall what year it was that they brought it in. It might have been like 68 or something like that.
Right around there, I think.
It was late 60s that kind of stuff came around, and where they really started having some fun with it.
That was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
I wait for my neighbors to come home. Hey,
It really is. It really is funny. Like what features about particular cars that make us fall in love with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, whether it's flip up headlights or whatever. Or
what a phase that was.
Well, and I mean, like you look at the Cougar Eliminator, they had it looked like a grill across the entire front of the car, but then the lights had shades that would raise up when you turn the headlights on. So it gave it the true like aggressive void, front end look, but it could still practically shine the lights.
Right, you need those.
Yeah, ideally.
They're important. But do you know what color you're going with? I know you said it was primed. Have you picked a color?
Yes. So we're going. Drum roll, please. Black. But it's a little bit more than just a true black. What we're doing is we're going to do a gloss black on most of the car with a paint fleck. Some debate back and forth between either a purple or a green metallic flake.
Ooh, I like green. That sounds...
I'm a fan of the green
my
as
vote.
well.
I agree. That's nice.
So either way, so it's going to have a metallic flake in it. But then what we're doing is the rest of the car, all of the chrome pieces, we and a lot of car folks, anybody who watches this, are probably going to cringe a little bit. But we've removed all of the chrome.
I hate chrome.
So yeah, no, I know there are a lot of like classic car folks who are like they're like, you can't get rid of that. That's one of the. I'm like, no,
Chrome's a big thing.
All the chrome is gone.
Yeah, I'm
so
not a chrome guy.
all the chrome, all those metal pieces, all the pop metal, everything, it is stripped and primed for paint. And we're going to do a chip guard matte black on all of the all the prime, or on all of the stuff that would have been chrome, and then on the actual car in between the gloss black with the flake, we're going to do a matte black ghost stripe, either one or two. I haven't really decided yet. We'll line it with body lines and whatnot from the front to the rear, so it ties in those other pieces so they don't look unfinished.
That'll look cool. It'll be a black on black, but it'll have like some
black on black, and
contrast
the headlights on that car. For anybody who's familiar with with the '73 body style for the Cougar, they have like the bug eye headlights. They've got 4 of them, and so that we're actually going to get the style that are similar to, I believe Harley does them, where they're a black backer with an LED.
Oh, okay.
So that when you're looking at them straight on, they do appear blacked out and they don't have the reflectives. So but that way it keeps it with that true matte black. Everything is blacked out look, and then it'll still be functional.
And dark interior as well, black interior.
So ideally, yes, it's actually going to be a black and brown because we're. So it is funny. My father-in-law's kind of collected pieces for his Franken car over the years, and when we got it from him, there were 3 dashboards.
The same,
3.
all of the same dashboard.
Yeah, all came with one car. Yeah.
Huh.
So there's the one that came out of the car originally because the car was just a base model, or excuse me, it wasn't a base model. It was like a premium model. But the sport version of the Cougar was the XR7. The XR7 had additional gauges and clusters that were available with toggle switches. I don't even know what half of them do, but there's a bunch of switches for stuff, which means you can wire things into them to make them do whatever you want it to do.
Maybe?
Yeah, I mean, let's not get carried away. I don't want to kill the car. I just finished it. Okay, but no. So the dashboard, we're going to use the XR7 dash, which is black plastic with wood grain, which was very popular in the 70s. It's
no longer the 70s.
That's okay. It's a 1973 car.
Right.
Remember, I said resto mod.
Yeah,
so the outside's going to be changed up a little bit, but on the inside, we're going to go with that black and brown. I'm going to try and keep the original Cougar logos for the seats. While reupholstering the rest of the stuff, we're probably going to remove the rear seats because just having an insulated tray back there would be better in terms of whether you want additional accessories for, like what you had mentioned, if you wanted to go full race mode with the car, or just for storage and whatnot. And also, I mean, let's be real, unless you're a double amputee, you can't fit in the back of that car anyway, so it's kind of a pointless feature.
When did the Cougar start to get larger? Remember how everything started to get larger?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything started getting larger in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so that's it. So when I looked at it and he said, "Oh, it's a Mustang," I was like, "There's no way." And then I looked at the 1973 Mustang and I was like, "Oh, that's a Mustang." Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah.
But it was just it was something where they went from these small cars that had big engines to big cars that had big engines that made no power.
Yeah, right.
So it's like
they're suddenly way heavier.
Yep. They were way heavier, but they choked them out. Is really the issue. Like they took the exact same engine that made 350 plus horsepower 2 years prior, and all of a sudden it made less than 200 horsepower.
So what was changed on it?
They put smog equipment all over the car.
So just limiting how much fuel probably is getting in. And
well, it was all about breathing in the air coming out, because so essentially an engine's like it is like a living organism.
Right.
It needs fuel just like we need
equal and opposite reactions.
Yeah, just like we need food, and it needs to breathe and it needs to be able to exhale. And if it can't do if it doesn't have the fuel and it doesn't get the air coming in or the air going out, it chokes out. And so the smog equipment was put there to obviously reduce the amount of, brown haze over cities, which, in and of itself, not a bad thing.
Right.
But it in effect, it took the fun out of a lot of the cars. And so one of the things that you can very easily do to any of those vehicles is you'll have to tweak the fuel air mix on your carburetor, but you can just remove the smog equipment and drastically impact your vehicle's horsepower without having to do anything mechanical to it.
Right. Then in the late 70s, early 80s timeframe, I'm guessing, they had the energy crisis. Mm-hmm. And that's when...
I'm sure that was definitely not related to all of a sudden making every vehicle extremely fuel inefficient.
Oh, no, not at all, right?
Yeah, no. Definitely no cause and effect there.
The Mustang 2.
Yeah.
That's all you could get was the Mustang 2. They lowered the scale on the Mustang pretty much, and it was all about fuel economy.
Yep. Yep, and that's when a lot of import brands started coming in and whatnot, and that's heck, I can't really be all that mad about it because if anybody who's a fan of Fast and the Furious, that's where the Supra came from.
Right.
Early '90s was the fourth gen of the Supra, and that was just an absolute monster of a build.
Yeah. Well, and I know that around that same time, Japan was doing a thing where they all had met and been like, "This is the most horsepower we're allowed to put out in certain vehicles."
Well, yeah, Europe did that, and Japan did that. They have a gentleman's agreement that the cars would not have more than I think it was 300x horsepower,
right. And they didn't, but if you just take this one thing out, suddenly you unlocked all the actual horsepower.
Yeah, so Toyota said, "Okay, yep, we'll play by your rules." I think
they marketed it.
It was 325 or something like that, and then but it on a dyno without any modifications would dyno 60 horsepower higher. Mm-hmm. Oops,
and
sorry for the clerical error.
Yeah.
Well, and then
small things, and suddenly you unlock.
They also gave you a fully forged and cast block that could take up to 1,200 horsepower without any reinforcements or modifications whatsoever, or increases in displacement. So all you had to do was up the compression, and all of a sudden you had a car that was making absurd power. And the transmission was one that was easily built for a 700 horsepower car.
Yeah, they built everything with intention of it being way more powerful.
And then they put a tiny little hairdryer on it, turbo, and said, "Okay, yep, no, it's fine, it's compliant. Definitely don't change that turbo, whatever you do."
Yeah, all it takes is a slightly larger turbo, and
and all of a sudden it's a car that just destroys everything. And of course, we're talking about the old 2JZ motor, and then Nissan did something similar in their Skyline /GTR. With that setup, and that thing just absolutely demolished on the racetrack.
Yep, it was a very popular drift car and stuff too.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, an all-wheel drive car that you could just get gobs of power out of, and it was loaded. It was meant to stay stuck to the road. Right. It's kind of hard to beat that. You can get more power out of the Supra, but it's a rear-wheel drive, so you would lose out on corners and whatnot. Right. So it made for a nice little rivalry that wasn't really a rivalry on any track, but in the tuner world, the Supra folks definitely got their laughs in. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, here we had those the Shelby Chargers and stuff that were little hatches and lawnmowers basically.
Yeah, yeah. When you look at how the Shelby Cobra came around. They took an AC tub and stuffed a giant Cobra Jet V8 in it. Here's a 427 cubic inch motor in a car that weighs 1,200 pounds.
Right.
Have fun, don't die.
Do the math on that. Right. Well, Mason, before we let you go, we've talked quite a bit about your 73 Mercury Cougar project. Is there a timeline? Is there a date that Sport Car USA will actually be able to show it on one of our podcasts?
Will it be ready for our showcase in May?
Good point.
It will not be ready for May. I can all but guarantee that. This car is 20 years in the making, and it will not be unveiled until it is done. And so at this point, I can't really put necessarily a firm end date on when that'll be. I was hopeful that I would have had it done by this point, but considering that we've essentially, it went from a restoration to essentially I've had to custom build a car from the ground up.
Yeah.
with kind of an idea of what it's supposed to look like when it's done. And so both from a money and time perspective, it has just snowballed into its own thing. And it just, so it, you know, some of the stuff that we thought we were going to be able to reuse is not, it is no longer in the cards. You know, the entire interior has to get replaced short of the actual dash itself. And even that, I have to re-weld supports for the interior of the dash. The door panels and whatnot are not the correct color, so even if we reuse them, we have to reupholster them. Right. The seats, the interior of them, because they were sitting in water, actually rotted out. So when we did a test sit on them to see, like, okay, can we just put new cushions and use the frames and whatnot, sit on them on the floor, and the frame actually snapped. It's things like that where it's going to be a matter of sourcing them, and once we make the big decisions with regards to like the next big steps, like I said, we have transmission, drive shaft, rear end. Those are the big three that are going to be the next steps in terms of the determining factors for a lot of stuff. Then we have to fit suspension and whatnot, put wheels and tires on it, and an exhaust, and the exhaust is going to have to be custom again. Right. So like everything on the car is going to have to be put together once we have a rolling, like a rolling and functioning chassis. Then it becomes about cosmetics and how you want to finish certain things. And I'm assuming that I have certain parts and pieces and whatnot. And one particular point of frustration, which is like the most difficult piece on these old cars to find, they have one side view mirror that's actually mounted on the front fender on the passenger side. Okay. We had one. A gentleman who was helping us pack up all the pieces for it tossed it into the box and shattered it.
Oh.
So I have to find one. And for that reason, they're next to impossible to find. So like they're just little things that are like, little insult to injury with regards to this. So I don't have an end date on it. I would love to say, it'll be ready next year. It'll be ready this year. It'll be ready 2 years from now. I don't have the answer on that. But at the moment it is done, it will be registered for a car show at Sport Car USA.
That's awesome. A lot of people watching and listening to our podcast, maybe thinking about getting into a resto project. If you had to give them any advice, what would it be? And I'm guessing patience would be at the very top.
So come up with your plan. And once you've established what your plan is, what your budget is, what your goal is for the car, throw all of that completely out the window, spend about 3 times the amount of money you anticipated, and then you'll end up with the car that you actually wanted.
Yeah, I think definitely doing it all on paper first.
That's great advice.
No, I mean, even if you do it on paper, like whatever you write down, you may as well light it on fire. It doesn't matter because the car is going to be whatever it is because
the car dictates what it wants to be.
Well, to some degree, the car dictates what it wants to be. But even if you're just going for a restoration of the car, what you can see and what you find when you take it up, like when we took the car apart, like some of these old cars, you'd be astonished at what went into them. I found that part of the floor was actually old roofing tin.
Oh, my goodness.
That had been, like, bondoed in place and then painted over.
From the factory?
No, yeah, sure, totally, from the factory. No, like folks who did body work on this part of the car, because, like I said, it was a bit of a Franken car.
Metal is metal,
Well,
close enough.
Well, and then, one of the things that we discovered as well was, like, in the rear fenders, somebody had stuck a bunch of roofing tar to fill space because they thought that there shouldn't be a lip there. And I'm like, no, the fender's actually supposed to like exist and just be metal. It's not supposed to be 6 inches of gum.
Right. Always expect the unexpected.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, firewall situation, like you said.
And I mean, you get a car that's been sitting, and someone's like, "Yeah, I've kept it in a garage for the last 30 years. This thing will be perfect." It's like, yep. You know what else lives in garages? Mice. Right. You know what mice do to cars? They live in them, and when they live in them, they pee on them, and that creates corrosion. Yeah. You're basically soaking the car in acid, which is not good for it. So, it's just so I guess expect the unexpected would be an oversimplification of it. It's like you want to come up with what your goal is and what you anticipate on spending, but then go into it fully knowing that all of your thoughts and plans for that are going to go completely by the wayside by the time that you're done, and you're going to be into it for at least 3 times as much as you anticipated in the first place, because what starts out as a practical project to whether you consider it an investment or whether it's a piece of nostalgia or whatever, it then becomes a truly like hated third cousin that you then adopt into your family by the time it's done. So it's a funny little thing that happens where it kind of worms its way into your head. You can't stop thinking about it, and then you end up getting emotional about it, and then you make some stupid decisions about what the car should be rather than just doing it from a purely practical standpoint. But if you do it from a purely practical standpoint, where's the fun in that?
Yeah, right. And you can't give up on it, right? I mean, it's part of the family.
Well, then I mean, by the time you get to the point where you're ready to give up on it, you're in too deep, and you may as well finish.
Exactly.
So you can cry about it, you can go to therapy, and then just get it done.
Right. Well, Mason Maltais, thank you so much for being with us today. Mason is with Sport Car USA and the Handy Auto Group here in the St. Albans, Vermont area. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Next time I want to get Desiree on, your wife.
Oh boy, yeah, no, she's got she likes talking about cars probably even more than I do.
We're going to keep our audience updated as to how the progress is going with your '73 Cougar.
Next time I make a forward step with it, I'll definitely keep you aware.
All right,
that's for sure.
Scott Nickerson from Sport Car USA, thanks for being with us.
Of course,
as well. I'm Lee Bodette, your host, and we want to thank everybody for listening to our podcast number 40. Be sure to check out our test drive series on YouTube, and we'll see you next time on our next Test Drive podcast. And remember, let's never forget the men and women serving this great country of ours. Goodbye, everybody.